Always a big shout out to Ashley, to Stephen, Sharon, to Graham, the entire university, events and special ceremonies for making this possible through Pit Wide Live. I want to remind y'all that this is being recorded. You can go to our YouTube, Interfaith Pit, to see past sessions that we've done throughout the past few months. We're going to get started in a couple minutes. Want to give you some time to log in. Thank y'all for logging in one more time. I miss Robert Glasper too. Peace and blessings to everybody that is tuning in. My name is Emiola J. Oriola. This is Interfaith Sessions, Building New Bridges Together. Alexandra, what's going on? Thank you for logging on. We've been doing this for the past few months, seeing as though we are quarantined right now. We want to make sure that we can engage you online. So this has been an endeavor sponsored and pretty much started by Pit Wide Live. So for all students, staff, faculty, community partners, as we have been quarantined during this pandemic, Pit Wide Live is made to really create a platform for you to engage body, mind, spirit, and really just edify yourself. So if you haven't logged on to Pit Wide Live, if you're a student, staff, faculty, community member, please do that. What's going on, Pastor Andre? Lutheran Student Fellowship. Shout out to UPAC, always showing love. As always, make sure y'all log in. Make sure you let me know who you are, because this is a communal environment. This is a dialogue, not a monologue. So I need to know who you are as we engage. Just to remind you, this is being recorded. You can go to our YouTube page, Interfaith Pit, to see past interfaith sessions. For the past few months, we've been covering sessions where we get to know people and their stories. In April, we talked on holy days and special months that a lot of our neighbors are celebrating, and how the pandemic has pushed people aside. How the pandemic has pushed people aside, and how we are just trying to be alone together. So during this time, because of what's going on in the country and because of what has been going on in the country, we felt it remiss. I felt it remiss that if I didn't touch on what was going on. So our usual theme is step into my shoes, the journey of our neighbors, celebrating holy days, celebrating religious holidays. But now we've switched it for the time being to fighting for justice. And to give you a bit of a breakdown, as I mentioned, we've taken a break from our usual sessions to focus on this and try to understand what it means to us as people from varying worldviews. The tragic and unjust deaths of Breonna Taylor, of Aumaud Arbery, of George Floyd, and many, many, many other people have not only sparked protests around the world for change, but discussions within communities about injustices that occur against marginalized communities and people of color, specifically Black and African-American neighbors. And as I've mentioned before, for us to gain real progress as a society, we need to match our brave feet marching for justice on the outside with courageous and very hard conversations about injustice and its implications on the inside. And for the past few weeks, we've had great participants and panelists and friends and colleagues and students, and this week is no different. I've had one of my professors, I've just adopted her as a mentor, and her name and her work precedes her. But this is Dr. Lori Delale-O'Connor, Dr. DOC, Dr. Lori, the people's champ, as many of us call her, but she's an assistant professor of education here at Pitt for the Center of Urban Education. Her research focuses on examining the connections between families, communities, and education across spaces, with a particular focus on fostering equity and justice for children and youth in urbanized educational systems. I could read her entire bio, but we'd be here for a few days. But I want to make sure that we just get some wisdom and nuggets from her. So we want to welcome you, Dr. Lori. How's it going?
Hey, it's good. I appreciate you having me on, Emiola. I appreciate being able to have this conversation.
Oh, this is wonderful. I'm just happy because us as students, we get to receive some of the gems that Dr. Lloyd drops on us when we're in class. So y'all get to kind of get into our class and receive some of those gems. And I felt it necessary to even have one of my really great friends that has grown into a friend and classmate. She has fire within her bones. And I just want y'all to hear that she's a doctoral student within the arc that I'm in, out of school learning here at the University of Pittsburgh in the School of Education. I have my good friend and scholar and just fellow advocate, Katie Todd. What's going on, Katie?
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you. Glad to have you. Where are you calling from, Katie?
I'm in Boston.
You in Boston? You in Boston? How's it down there?
It's okay. It's kind of rainy, but it's good.
The rain traveled from Pittsburgh, so I want to bring you back. This is the only city where you can get 4 seasons in 1 week.
Sometimes one day.
See, it's tough. So it's tough being in Pittsburgh. But we're going to get into each other's stories. So I'm just going to remind y'all that we're going to shift into the discussion. So if you have any questions, any comments, you can move from the chat to the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Let us know if you have any questions or comments. And at the end of our interfaith session, we will get to those. If you want to reach some of our guests, Dr. Lori or Katie, I have their emails and social security numbers, all the information you need to get in touch with them, because I'm pretty sure you're going to want to receive some gems from them. And with that being said, I always like to give our audience or our viewers a chance to kind of get to know the context behind the content. We all are, you could be doctoral students, professors, there are many titles, but when it comes to getting to know people in this day and age, it's very difficult to get into the depths of people because arguments and ideas many times separate us. But Dr. Lori, I guess just to kind of get into your story, what brought you, I guess, briefly to Pitt, because your work, you kind of live in between hard places and rocks when it comes to the type of work that you're doing. But I guess where did you come from, and what brought you to where you are right now in your many identities? And I guess, how are you right now with what's going on?
Sure. I mean, that's a lot of big questions. So Pittsburgh is my hometown. So for me, being able to come home was a huge, huge aspect of this work, and to be able to do this work at home. But it was a very sort of, I wouldn't say that I knew the path when I was on it, but when I look back on the path, I think it makes a lot of sense, right? And I think you and I have had some conversations already that have scratched the surface of that I think, oh, that's how that connects back. That's how that connects back. So I was a high school teacher, as I will always tell everybody all the time, because that was a very important identity of mine. And before I went back into graduate school, but I even went into high school teaching because in Pittsburgh, I had been very much raised as a part, I think in this conversation, as a part of a Catholic church community that was very, very committed to worker justice. So coming from, like a Pittsburgh labor background, I think I learned and was exposed to a lot of the things that I care very deeply about from a different perspective. I would say from the perspective of working people on picket lines, on all of those kinds of things. And I remember growing up very much doing that with my dad. And when I sort of moved into college and decided what I wanted to do, as a little girl, I mean, my only dream was to be a member of a union. And that is how I was raised. And I remember, you know, every job, I'm like, but do you get to be in a union? And when I really started to pick what did I want to do professionally, education to me really seemed to dovetail with that justice work. And so I think that my path through education was first becoming a teacher, then wanting to have a larger reach. So I loved my students. I love being in the classroom, but I also was, you know, wanted to know what could I do? And I was where Katie is now, I was in Boston, but what could I do beyond my 60 students? And so that pulled me to graduate school. And then I started doing research and evaluation and really was seeing that as a site of how do we make the world just through this lens. And so when the opportunity came up to work at the Center for Urban Education, where that commitment to racial justice, to equity through education was there, but with all of the different components of my prior experience, so teaching, evaluation, broader research, engaging with future teachers and leaders, it was, I mean, truly, it was a dream job. So when I had the opportunity to come up, I, as many folks who live in the academic world know, I mean, just because you're dreaming, it doesn't mean they're gonna bring you in. And so when I actually had the opportunity to do this, I couldn't have said no. And for us as a family, I have, you know, two daughters at home with me, and we had the opportunity then to be near their Nana and Pap. And so it was like the whole aspect of it was really, really a gift, because I was now able to come back to my roots, but to expand with what I've learned.
Wow. I don't know, because y'all know I think in pictures and metaphors, and I just see you on that journey of, you know, going to graduate school, working as a high school teacher, but picking up different things as you go, and how that kind of made you who you are right now, to even come back to Pittsburgh, but with like just with a utility belt
Right,
of just
absolutely.
different resources.
Absolutely.
And just different wisdom that you've picked along the way. And as you've been teaching for a while, I guess with what you've seen, I guess, how are you right now? Just kind of processing what you're seeing. How are you personally?
Right. I mean, I appreciate that question, right? It's the question that I think should motivate us all when we come into spaces with each other. I'm hopeful. I mean, I think is maybe part of what I'm angry, I'm tired, but I'm hopeful. I feel like, particularly on this broader path toward racial justice, there are enough folks who are now angry from different sectors and from different perspectives. And I think we're seeing a lot in all the different aspects of my life. I'm seeing movement. So for me to have a conversation again about state-sanctioned killing of Black people, that is actually something we talk about quite a lot at Q, right? We talk about racial injustice, we name it. We talk about anti-Blackness, we name it. I'm now having those kinds of conversations with people and in spaces I never expected to see them. And so that to me is very, very hopeful. When I'm seeing everything from my children's school district, board members saying, hey, can we have a conversation, to, my parents wanting to sit down and say, hey, did you read about, to like further reaching folks, even students that I engage with who might not have centered these ideas, that are now like, we need to do something. So I feel like the urgency that has always been there, right? I don't think that things have changed, but I think that I'm hopeful, because I think that more people are on board to try to engage in this work and to try and learn, right? And talking with you and with Katie, I think of your cohort and the cohort before you in the EDD program. And I think of the ways even the courses that I teach are being received differently. There's even a push for more, right? For a desire to move this work forward, not just because we have to, but because we want to, and we want all of our work to be rooted in it, not just because, I work in, I would hear often, well, you're at Q at the Center for Urban Education, you work with Black and brown folks. it doesn't matter as much to me because I mostly work with white folks, or my work isn't in education. Like this isn't as relevant to me. And I think now more folks are seeing the like this is relevant to every aspect of life. So again, there is an anger, there is a sadness there that we need to continue to see this to get more folks on board. But there's a huge hopefulness for me because I think that we are in a moment. And I keep hearing this from other folks, you know, like old heads who are saying, no, we're in a, maybe that's me now too, but that we're in, this is not a moment like I've seen it before. And that to me feels very, very hopeful, right? That there are folks that are tuning in to listen to you across all the places, that there are lots of moments like this that are happening online and in person, and people are seeking them out. To me, it makes me feel hopeful. So that's how I start. That's how I come to you today, and it's how I'm starting my day.
I think that's really, really important. You had a lot of gems in there just about how you're personally feeling, but it was all aimed towards hope. And I think that's really important right now because Katie and I, we've had conversations and we were just talking how because of the pandemic, we couldn't have those, you know, in-person conversations, which are really integral to just growing as people. And from my time of knowing you, Katie, you've always been somebody who is intentional about doing the work and pushing the buttons externally, but also growing internally. And that's pretty rare to see somebody want to do that type of work, especially at the highest level as a doctoral student. I guess, where did you get that from? Even your journey of what has brought you, not just to Pitt as a doctoral student, but who you are as an ally, as an advocate, as a person who, from our conversations, is passionate. You know, I told our viewers, you got 2 guns in your pocket and, you know, you got your head like you ready to use them in terms of just you going forward. So I guess if you could share where you got that type of passion and just intentionality from your journey here, and how are you too?
Yeah. So I guess I'll start at just who I am. I'm white. I'm a middle-class progressive Christian. I'm a temporarily able-bodied athlete. And I have a complicated relationship with gender, but if you're wondering what my pronouns are, you can call me by she, her, and hers. And I grew up in a very racially segregated middle-class suburb. I never had to worry growing up where my next meal was going to come from. And I grew up sort of in a culture of expectation where I think there was one conversation around the dinner table where my mom said, well, I went to Harvard and your dad went to Brown, so where are you going? So that's sort of the trajectory of my upbringing. You can think about it. But church was always really central to my sort of more critical understanding. So we grew up in the United Church of Christ, which has been active in activism for a long time. So very active in the civil rights movement, very active for environmental justice. And then as I was growing up, one of the things that was really instrumental in our church and especially in our youth group was thinking about LGBTQ issues and really fighting for inclusion of LGBTQ people in our congregation and thinking about equity more broadly. But I think even though my parents were very much entrenched in some of the systems of white supremacy and of neoliberalism and strong believers in meritocracy that were reinforcing these structures that we're now questioning very heavily, my parents also really helped me to be critical. So they're both very strong feminists. And so in terms of church, we used to go on youth mission trips each year. And I remember from very on my mom sort of having a critical eye on that and bringing up these ideas of, even though she didn't use the words white saviorism, this sort of sense of like, why are we doing this? And how does it fit in with God's broader plan? So I think that's sort of been in my upbringing. And then I went off to college and I went to CMU. So that first brought me to Pittsburgh. I didn't fit in with my parents' plans initially to go to an Ivy League school. But there I was really sort of methodologically drawn to social science and quantitative statistics and that sort of thing. But at the same time, I couldn't see where that led me to a place that was doing any good in the world. So I studied religion alongside of social science. And when it got to the end of my undergrad, I decided that's sort of where I needed to head. So I went to Harvard Divinity School, finally made my parents happy. There I studied early Christianities very deeply, really looking at not just the one traditional trajectory of Christianity that's sort of in many ways gotten ingrained, but recognizing that there's been a multiplicity of Christianities right from the beginning. And so that education really also had a critical lens on looking at power and privilege and what that has meant in our faith communities from a very early point of time. And I thought initially I was going to be a professor, and then I, through that work, got to learn about Christian social service and got into some nonprofit organizations that showed me about evaluation, which Laurie just mentioned. So I guess we're the evaluation crew today. But it was a way that I could use my quantitative social science methods to be actually doing something good in the world, and it was a way for me to carry out my mission, even outside of a church, but within nonprofit organizations. And I sort of got my feeling of a dream job, very much like what Dr. DOC just said. I got the chance to be a full-time evaluator in a museum, which is where I am now. I'm a senior research and evaluation associate at the Museum of Science in Boston. And I see myself there as it's an institution that sort of oozes whiteness and has a history of colonialism, and you know, in many ways, it's a very problematic history. But I'm also surrounded by people who are supportive, even if not knowledgeable, about ways that we can change and sort of repent of some of those sins, if you will. We might not use that language. But so that has really been an outlet for me to really continue that mission work and to push for equity in an educational setting as well. Wow.
It's I don't know. One, I just want to thank y'all for being transparent and vulnerable, because this is stuff that you get not just sitting in a Starbucks or a coffee place and like one-on-one type of conversations, but this is like life stuff, and just the journeys we take. And Katie, and I've seen this in our personal conversations, but you hinted at how your parents may have had that kind of white privilege bubble, but still push you to critique and be a critical thinker. And with the list of names that I read in the beginning of this session of the Black bodies and the Black lives that had been taken unjustly, and the conversations that I've had, I've seen many people who were talking about justice have an issue of praising America or praising and uplifting our criminal justice system and just this institution, and believing that it's not, you can't critique it. I can't ask any questions. I can't say, hey, I like where I'm living. I like how America is. We have a lot of good stuff, but I have a question about this, and I don't think this should happen. And I've seen people wrestle in that hard place of just saying, hey, I know we do need police, but I don't think you're supposed to put your knee on somebody's neck for that long. But I know this, and I know this, and I've just seen people wrestle in that. And Dr. DOC, I mentioned prior that you kind of live in that hard place in Rock Valley where you wrestle with equity, and I'm interested how you're interpreting, I guess, engaging, especially in academia, with people who have an issue separating, embracing the benefits of a system and an institution, with the idea of can I really critique this? You know, as Katie mentioned, her parents said, no, I want you to push, I want you to think, I want you to ask questions. And it seems like right now there's usually a period where a comma should be in a lot of conversations and dialogue. I guess, what are you having on your side, and do you see that problem, or at least that reality?
And I think it's a great point and a great question. And it's interesting to hear, not knowing all that about Katie, even though I know Katie, I think about having a very different experience, having grown up in a very working class family. I'm the first of my family to go to college. So getting a PhD was its own, nobody really knew what I was doing or why. And so I think that aspect of it, a lot of it was, you can question when somebody is clearly being wronged, right? That part of it, but we're not questioning for the sake of questioning. And part of what we train you all to do, right? Like that is the pushback. It is at the core of graduate studies. It's one of the reasons I do appreciate the opportunity to work at a university, is this opportunity to push that critique, right? That we live, I mean, in some sense, it's an interesting space for graduate students because we live in the critique, right? To the point where sometimes I'm like, well, okay, we still need to do something. And yes, everybody is still, I've probably said this in our class, and I've certainly said it in others, where sometimes you're limited on word count. Sometimes you're limited by the text so maybe that person didn't get to that, or are they actively like, what can we find that is also, you were talking about gems, Amiola, like that are gems from this, even as we critique, right? And so to me, I think that we actually are in a space where the critique is not an uncommon one, right? Like that is part of what academia is founded on. One of the biggest challenges I'm seeing is our willingness to turn that back on ourselves, right? And so we can talk about different institutions, and certainly, certainly when we think about public education, because that's the space where I live, like K-12, it's easy to level those critiques, right? It's not easy to change things, but it is easy to see where things have gone wrong, where things are deliberately structured to get the outcomes that we get. The police, right, leveling that critique, and it's one that I would very much level. I mean, we can talk about the origins of what policing systems are meant to do, who they are meant to harm, who they are meant to punish, right? And at their core, I think we should critique that all day. Part of that also means, what does that mean for us as higher education? Right? Why do we get to be in this Zoom room having this? Why do I get to be here? Right? Why is my expert opinion? Right? You said I study families and communities, and I think all of that is important. But why does my published word hold more weight than some of the things I learned from my grandmother or from my dad? Right? Who didn't go to college? And so, to me, there's also, and who do we keep out? Right? And as we think about what it means to change our numbers, and not just to get more Black and brown faces, but to get more people who have different experiences, who don't have two parents who went to college, who maybe don't have two parents, who are coming from different structures, and whose lived experience counts, right, and matters as part of our learning. And so as we think about, again, I am harshly critical of pretty much everything. Anyone who knows me will say, I'll say it with love, but I will. I'm always like, well, we could do that better. How could we do that better? How could I be better? But also, what does it mean for us to be thinking about the systems that we, just by our continued, I receive a paycheck. Thank you, University of Pittsburgh. I appreciate that paycheck. I love my work. But what does that mean I'm complicit in? So those, to me, that's part of the questioning that I'm I'm trying to push myself to ask. I appreciate when students push me to ask that, right? Like, well, I'm an assistant professor, so I am working to publish my work, in part because I think I have something to say. I think that you don't give people voice, but you can amplify experiences that don't generally get focused on, right? And center those experiences rather than centering, particularly white, upper class, middle class ways of being. But in the same respect, part of the reason I do what I do also is because that is what's rewarded within the sphere of the university, right? And so how do I balance those things, right? And so to me, what does that critique mean, particularly in this moment, right? I like my job. I think I'm good at my job. I think I support my students to push through these, but in that pushing, what critiques should they also be leveling on me? And so that I feel like is what I wrestle with most in this space, right? When I think about even, I if we're transparent to the audience, right? We're all in a class that is about writing. And I think about the different things you all cite and the things you bring in, and I'll say, oh, read this research article, check out this evaluation report. But again, I think of our one of our associate deans, Dr. Lee Patel, when she said, like, cite your mother, cite your grandmother, right? Where does that fit in, right? And how do I keep from being complicit in saying, no, only this knowledge counts, when, I know that that's not how I feel, but how am I just, even with my practices, upholding some of these same things? And so that, to me, so all day, I guess the answer is, yeah, I think we should all be supporting each other and supporting our students in leveling critiques across all systems, because most of these systems were created to uphold a world that we don't want. I think we don't want, right? And it doesn't mean little tweaks. I mean, it really fundamentally means undermining the system. But then when you topple a system, depending on where you lived in that system, you're gonna fall too. And so what does that mean, right? Like, again, I love what I do. And so what does that mean? Like, not just making space for other folks who do it differently, but really thinking about what it means to fundamentally change that system. Does it mean that this job, a job like this doesn't exist, or it looks different? Or, like, those are the things that I think I want to push my students to think about, but also as a result, then myself have to question.
Dr. DOC, that's a transformative statement, because it's groundbreaking, not because it's externally visible, saying, yes, topple this building, but it says, no, this building, like, there's cracks in here. And I don't want to say that's just a humble place to be, but I think life has to bring you to that place and show you your blind spots and say, you know what, like, why am I only citing these people? Why does my grandmother not hold this type of weight? And that's something to really, I ask myself, and Kate, we've had this conversation of just being in an institution, and, I don't have, my parents did, they got their GED, you know what I mean? So it's like to be here, it's like, man, the air is thin up here. I don't even know if I can survive with this type of air. And it's I don't know, it's something that I wrestle with too. And when you mentioned, and when you touched on, like, a deep introspection, and how that is more difficult for people to do, which is why you encourage and support your students and colleagues and yourself to do that. I guess, Katie, how have you done that? Because even in your introduction, you basically were doing introspection without being asked. You said, oh, no, this is my name. This is how I know people see me. This is what I wrestle with. This is what, like, people have to be lured into doing it or given an incentive. And you did that off jump. You did that with seemingly with some boldness. And I mean, what is that process for you like as a person who pretty much shows their cards and says, no, I need to get rid of this. This is here. This was an issue. I like this card. Like, what is that process for you just personally? Because that's.
Yeah, I mean, it's an ongoing battle, because I am not afraid to criticize myself. That list of identities that I shared at the beginning is like the list of reasons why everyone should hate me, right? And like, I'm kind of on board with that. That, like, it's all these privileges and how I deal with that. And I am firmly of the sort of assumption that people like me need to give things up for the world to be more equitable. And yet it's like, it's this ongoing thing. Lori talked about a paycheck. Like, I'm not at such a privileged point that I can actually say that I'm not going to get a paycheck, right? And yet I believe that, like, at pretty much any job that I could have, a person of color could do it better, right? So I have this, like, constant tension there of, like, I got to do something, but wherever I am, I'm bringing my privilege. So how can I be constantly challenging that? But I also kind of wanted to connect back to the sort of citation thing and the theme of the conversation of being about faith. And so from a progressive Christian denomination, I'm of the perspective that to be biblically based is to select your citations generally with an argument. But I think the idea of social justice is biblically complicated from where I stand. So there's this underlying understanding that we're all equal as children of God, we're all brothers and sisters, and yet there's also this theological tradition steeped in these models of charity, which are not radically transformative at their core. They're about like giving and sort of reducing a burden momentarily, but they're not about that radical reinvention. And then like a lot of this has come up recently of like being anti-racist isn't the same as being nice. But I think a lot of people, at least in my tradition, are very wrapped up in being Christians to be nice and to be loving, sort of at this interpersonal level. So I think the challenge comes with like, where are you getting to that? And I think for me, it's like that selective citation of something like tossing the temple tables, of recognizing that Jesus can go in and see that people are profiting off God's temple, and to say like, no, I'm gonna turn this over. And yet, sort of to your point, Amiola, about the self-reflection, like as a white person, I can say that I want to turn the tables over, but I am constantly profiting from that racketeering those tables to begin with, right? And so it's like, it's so ingrained and so big that I guess what helps me is to say that like, when I know that I am actively working for equity and justice, I'm calling out oppression when I see it, and I'm working to dismantle it, I may only be prying open like one little nail in that table, but I find this sense of peace knowing that there is forgiveness, and knowing that I can trust in God, and knowing sort of that there's scripture saying that God doesn't give us more than we can bear. And just the sense that like structural racism may have been invented and is sustained by people, but dismantling it sometimes feels not like a people-sized task, but a God-sized task. And so I just draw inspiration from that level, that like I need that God-sized inspiration to be fighting on a daily basis. So I don't know, I can stop there. But
I see, because I wish I had mics that I could drop and just, you know, I used to DJ, so those little sounds with those blaring horns where somebody say something good, and I love how you drew from your faith background and even exegeted some of the text and some of the context, and many times, just as people will put, when we're telling the narrative or reading one, we'll put ourselves in the hero place. You know, I'm the one that topples this. I'm the one that brings this building down, and rarely put ourselves in another sense saying, no, I may want to topple this, but I'm actually getting money off of this. I'm like this, me exchanging this money is helping me. And one of our classmates, I gotta show love, Shalegra, she in our cause she got about 2-3 guns blazing. If y'all know about Shalegra, that's the homie. And she said something, I think it was in our chat, but she said, what are you willing to lose for the sake of justice? And when you mentioned, Katie, many times just people wanting something and trying to be nice, but anti-racist, but flipping tables costs you something. And no matter where you're at, because as much as, you know, I can be a Black man, I know where I go to school. I know what getting a doctorate and having a paycheck and a job and trying not to live hand to mouth looks like. And Dr. DOC, you even mentioned, you know, critiquing yourself, just where you're at positionally, how it has benefits, how it has costs, I guess, not how if you wrestled with would it toppling your own table, you know what I mean, wherever it's at, but even with our system, with what we're seeing right now, because it seems just the list of bodies and lives keep counting, and, you know, the conversations get harder and it gets harder to cling to hope, you know, and the majority of our conversations are, you know, leave my table alone, you know, and you may get 1 or 2 people, you know, who, as Katie mentioned, say, oh no, my table needs to come down. I actually need help turning my own table over because there's about $1,000 on it and I want to keep it. But I know this $1,000 came from poor people that thought they were getting something good out of this. So, I mean, just that, I guess, how are you wrestling or even encouraging others to deal with that introspection? Because they may not deal with it as transparently and honestly as you do, Dr. DOC. They may say, maybe from another race or ethnicity, saying, you know what, my table's fine. Let me help you topple yours, or let's topple the systems. But my table really isn't doing too much damage. I guess, how would you engage in a conversation, which I know you have, but with somebody or a community or a student who is even wrestling with saying, you know, my table isn't that bad. What am I doing?
I think that's a beautiful question. And I love that, like, sort of the analogy of, right, like toppling our tables. I think that we're in a, you know, I mean, we're always in a particular moment, but one of the ways that I have been approaching that with folks recently in particular is, I think for a long time, folks talk about disrupting systems or changing something or wanting to work, you know, I think to Katie's point, wanting to work for justice, but what does that mean, right? Like, how does that implicate me? And we're in a space where not only, like we're seeing the intersection or, you know, the sort of buildup of multiple movements that are really impacted by the same things, right? And again, a lot of it is just tied with broader racial injustice and disparities that are now being amplified because, you know, because social media is able to pick up a strand and see that somebody has been murdered, even though people have long been murdered by the police. But also in this moment where we're, you know, experiencing a global pandemic that is disparately impacting in, you know, within the US, Black people, brown people, poor people, right? And thinking about, we have to, again, and I work a lot with schools and with educators, they have no choice. We have no choice but to respond to the pandemic. Everybody has had to respond, right? Every university, every K-12 institution, every restaurant, right? And part of what I'm encouraging folks to do is to see that as an opportunity, right? And myself too. So I'm now in this space where I have to change my table. Actually, I don't even have to topple it. Somebody else has toppled my table because the world is changing. So when I write it, or when I build a new table, or whatever it is I'm doing, maybe it's not even a table, now we're just in an open circle, right? Whatever I'm bringing, you can operate, and maybe it's because it in part takes the onus a little bit off of you as an individual, because I think you point out, Ameola, like, nobody wants to, it is hard to feel that way, right? To feel like, you know, Katie mentioned meritocracy, and I appreciate a lot of the terms you brought up as you were sort of sharing your positionality are so many things we talk deeply about in class, and are things I care deeply about, but are not things that people always interrogate about themselves, right? You can point it out about a system. But part of what you were talking about is, you know, in terms of meritocracy, we all may say we don't believe that. We know it's not true, right? We can point to it. But we really like to believe it's true about us, right? Because again, when I tell my story, number one, I like to have had a hand in it, right? And part of that is my hard work, or my brilliance, or maybe not even mine, right? Maybe it's my parents, right? It's maybe like, but it's part of this narrative that it isn't a combination of privilege, of luck, of these variety of forces, but that it's something that I've had a stronghold in. And so to me, when we think about dismantling systems, there is a moment right now where certain things have been dismantled for us. And so we can look at it as rebuilding. I was fortunate enough to participate in a district task force just this morning. And one of the things that came up, you know, we're talking about things like online learning and hybrid learning, all the conversations we're having across the university, all of these important things. And one of the things that I've been pushing myself to think about, but also others, is to say, hey, we're actually getting the opportunity. We don't have to just redo what we were doing before in a different platform. What we can do is actively think about, what did we not like about ourselves in that other platform? What did we not like about that other system? And how can we, when we're building this, whether it be for a semester, for a year, forever, think about those things, right? And it's a hard space to be in, I think, because again, we're also trying to respond in real time, and making those big changes in real time is very, very hard. But again, we're at a moment where you say, at least if the table's not turned over, it's at least halfway flipped, so I can help it. I can help it. So to me, it's all about sort of supporting people. I mean, and you know this, like I think I parent the way I teach, the way I try to advise, the way I try to just be in the world. And I think a lot of that is very much as a mother, right? It is very much, and not just because I'm a woman, but it's very much that act of mothering. And I think that in the ways that we're able to support ourselves and mother ourselves and parent ourselves and those that are around us to say, hey, this is an opportunity for change, not just what was wrong with you or what was wrong with the system, but what is this opportunity, is to me what I think has supported pushing those conversations forward right now. So we know we didn't get it right before, but we also know we're in a moment where there's an opportunity to change it because we have to. So I don't know if that answers it, but like to me, those are the conversations I feel like I've been pushing for myself, but also just participating in, right? Like I'm thinking, okay, so as I'm, designing the next project, what does that mean? As I'm thinking about designing the next class, what does that mean? As I'm even thinking about my own children going back to school in whatever form that looks like, how can they go back in a way that isn't about kindness, but that is really at the core about anti-racism, right? At all levels. And I think we're in a space where, again, that conversation can be had more readily than it might have been before.
And Dr. DLC, you touched on something that I thought about it before, but in terms of anti-racist work and just pushing forward the justice needle, you said something, I don't even know if you meant to say it, but I just kind of caught it when you said you do things in similar fashion in different parts of your life. You know what I mean? Like you have that mothering posture where you'll try to show people opportunity, and whether it's your children, whether it's at work, whether it's your colleagues, whether it's research, like you don't, your life is very integrated, and your posture and your heart flows all throughout it, and it made me wonder. There's a quote that I love. It says, "How you do anything is how you do everything." You can't really leave, and you can't leave certain parts of your life section off from another one. You can compartmentalize it, but when life hits, you know what I mean, blood goes everywhere. You know what I mean? At different layers of your life is hitting. When you mention like us having to respond to a pandemic that immediately, but then there's another pandemic that's going on that has to like be very parsed and paced because it's so multi-layered. It reminded me how much the privilege of some that can parse their life out and compartmentalize it. And for others, it's like, no, when it rains, it pours. So I don't get to choose to teach my child about racism. I have to tell them, no, every part of my life has to get this. And I've thought about that before, but when you mention it, and we call you the people's champ, in our cohort for a reason, but that just understanding it's the push of not just empathy, but you helping us to see opportunity in a lot of stuff and kind of coming where we are, but also kind of pulling us to say, you can come a bit further. You're actually not as far back as you think. You've actually made some progress. So it's not patting people on the butt, but it's giving them a more panoramic view to say, you know what, I'm going to challenge you, but also encourage you. I'm going to challenge you, but also encourage you, because hope is still that end destination. And Katie, we've had this conversation similarly to just the journey of going through school and how it's very tough for people. And I know you mentioned this before, of just part of your job and your identity is even pushing those who look like you to push that envelope as well, to kind of do what Dr. DLC mentioned of challenging and encouraging, and to not section off parts of our life, because that in itself is a privilege as well, to say, you know what, my family won't go through this, so I may not mention it to them. I'm just going to focus on this in my academic or professional life. So I guess, Katie, to round that thought out, how are you encouraging, I guess, those who are around you? And Dr. DLC mentioned that introspective work of, talking to our families, talking to ourselves, putting that mirror up, so to speak, to really look at some of the spots where we may be having a hypocritical sense of, calling meritocracy what it is, but really saying, you know what, but I had a hand in this, or saying, you know what, the country did this, but I didn't really, I didn't own any slaves. I didn't, I wasn't a part of this, but when it's something good, having my hands on that as well. So I guess how are you even processing that for yourself and encouraging those who are around you? Because you mentioned you live and work in certain areas where you may be surrounded with those who look like you and just the history of the work. So I guess, how are you going on that journey for yourself?
Yeah, I think I would actually take a slightly different tack than what Lori just said. Which
Okay.
is that maybe you're keeping that parenting as your goal, but what parenting looks like for one might be different than what parenting looks like for someone else. So it's how do you hold on to that core, whatever that is, but recognize that, like, right, equity is not the same as treating everyone the same way, and that the conversation that one person has to have may be different than what one person has to have. That naming white supremacy for one person might be like really eye-opening and might not be the best entry point for somebody else. So being responsive and really listening to who you're talking to, and recognizing that you have that same end goal, and helping people find the place that feels right for them, helping them in a process of discernment, that everyone has a place towards working towards justice. But exactly what that first entry point is can be pretty different for people.
That's huge.
And I was gonna say, I totally agree with that. And I think that's how I parent. Right? Like, I mean, because your children in a similar way. And I don't know that I advocate it. I think, to Emiola's point, like, for me, I can't be a different person. I've tried. I can't be a different person across those spaces because you're going to get who I am, but I am a different person for the people who need me, right? And so for some of, right, I think you said it beautifully, Katie. So for some folks, I'm like, come into my office. Here's my well, not anymore, right? My virtual office. Here's a box of Kleenex. Here's, like, let's just sit. It's okay. For other folks, it's, you are so far beyond this. How do I support you in taking a step beyond where this course is, or where my work is, or where the work in the field even exists, right? Like, you are dreaming and imagining beyond what has ever been. And that's exactly what we want, but that means then you're not going to be able to use the old structures, whereas somebody else is trying to figure out if everyone's still really equal, right? I think about the books that we use and I'm like, oh, that book. But it is, for some folks, you need that basic primer, and other folks are like, let's burn the primer because it doesn't get to where we need. Let's get to thinking about freedom, right? And those are very different spaces, but everyone can be supported. So I think I love that point that you made.
That's I don't know, that's a great way to even round it up, because I think about I think about the amount of statuses and tweets and Instagram posts and comments that I have from friends who may say, I have a Black friend, or I have a this friend, or I have that friend. And even that statement lets me know I don't think you have a relationship, because if your starting point is, I have a Black friend, if I have a this friend, if I have a that friend, how deep can they really go to you, where they can present truth to you and they can really, they know where your starting point is at. So to all our viewers, to all our hearers, to those who are in the audience that are, I guess, troubled with where you can engage somebody at. Everybody may not be at the Malcolm X by any means necessary. I was hearing some guy on Instagram where he's saying everybody is progressively getting woke. Some people get woke a little bit later. Some people have been woke. But understanding, as Katie mentioned, the starting point, where you can engage people at. And Dr. ZOC does that with all 60 plus of us. And then she has other students that she does that with. So I know that's a skill that is trained, but also that comes from your essence. So I want to leave y'all with, I guess, one word that you may have for the future, and one word that you have for the now. So Katie, I'll start with you. One word that you have for the future, something that you see maybe going on, and then one word you have for the now.
Oh man. Well, Lori stole hope. So I guess for the future, I have questions, and for the now, I have trust.
I like that. I like that. Dr. DOC, I guess one word you have for the future, and then one word you have for now.
The future, the word I'm going to emphasize is freedom. It's encompassing, all encompassing freedom. Can I add to like freedom and joy? But I guess there's joy in freedom. So freedom,
talk.
right? But and then I will go back to my, and for the now, I will say hope. I will say hope.
And my word for now and for the future is, it's been a pleasure. That's a whole sentence. Pleasure. It's been a pleasure because we have these conversations in private, but to do this in public, and even to Dr. DOC's point, to merge, different parts of my life together, because this is how I go to school, but this is work, but I also have friends on this. So it's just merging the two together to just encourage us to have integrity with what we're doing. So to our viewers, if you want to get in touch with Dr. DOC, if you want to get in touch with Katie Todd, and just ask them further questions, get in touch with me. And if it's okay, I'll send you down their path. But this is always a place to establish relationships, get more information, get more resources, educate yourself, and do what our panelists and our guests have been saying, and put that mirror up to yourself as much as we're doing it to the institution and what's outside. Do that for yourself as well. It's going to be a hard journey, but make sure you surround yourself with community and friends who speak the truth in love, because you need both of those. So to those who are from different faith communities, to those who aren't, I thank you for tuning in. We're going to shift to our ending slide. This is Interfaith Forward, building new bridges together. We continuing our theme on Step Into My Shoes, a journey with our neighbors, fighting for justice. So continue to do that on the outside as well as you are doing it on the inside. If you want to see more videos, if you want to see more sessions that we're doing, make sure you go to our Interfaith page on YouTube, Interfaith Pitt, and you'll be able to see more. And go to our website, www.interfaith.pitt.edu. With that being said, peace and blessings. Y'all have a blessed day. I'm going to play some more Robert Glasper because I missed the ending too.